Looks like we're missing a few, but we might. Where's Hannah?
Three bookmarks.
Okay. What we'll do is we'll start this afternoon just with a short introduction about how to access the apps. And so Lindsay will take you through our site, GeoSci.xyz, as well as some of the links that are associated with that, and then how to access the apps. So 50 minutes or something like that to kind of get through that, and then we'll go back and revisit inductive sources, but not from the viewpoint of actual application. And I think this afternoon we should be able to do inductive sources and grounded sources. Maybe natural sources empty or not, but that it'll be kind of about that region that we should be able to get to. So with that, Lindsay.
Show you here is GeoSci.xyz, and so this is the website that we've created that's a collection of open source resources for geophysics. So there's a few buttons here, and show you what each of these are. GPG is Geophysics for Practicing Geoscientists. It's really an introductory level sort of textbook that we've used at UBC for a geophysics course that's primarily taken by geologists and engineers. So it's kind of a once-over lightly of all the geophysical methods and a few examples. EM GeoSci is the textbook that's been developed for this course. And so there's a lot of material and figures and more explanation of what you've seen today on EM GeoSci. There's also a write-up of a lot of the case history. That'll be on there, so I'll show you that in a minute. SimPeg is the open source software that has been developed at primarily starting at UBC, but it's meant to be a growing project, and we've got contributors from other universities as well. There's some students involved at Colorado School of Mines, for instance. And so this is all written in Python, and it's meant to be a place where we can do forward simulations and inverse problems for ideally any method in geophysics. Right now, it's mostly magnetics, gravity, electromagnetics, which includes natural sources like MT, as well as some fluid applications. And then DISC 2017, this is where you'll find all of the information about today. You can find and download all of the slides, and there's links to the apps. And if you're curious about other locations and our blog, I can show you that later as well. So from EM GeoSci, let's take a quick look at this. So this is what you'll see when you first come to EM GeoSci. Two different pages. The ones that I just want to point out right now, and we'll do probably a bit more of a tour tomorrow, are the case histories. So these are examples all broken down in that 7-step framework that Doug showed earlier. Case histories of applications of EM geophysics around the world. So there's some mineral examples, there's some oil and gas and seismic examples, where here we're correcting, doing static corrections. So we'll actually do this later today. And so on. And geothermal, there's quite a few examples. This is also meant to be a place that people can contribute good case histories using EM. Please get in touch, and we can work with you to actually get your example live on the web. Most of these are based on an underlying scientific publication, so something that's been published in a journal. And then this is sort of the lighter version, synopsis, and then we can point to the original paper. So the thing that I do want to show you is how to access the apps. For the apps, There's two styles, and I'll probably show you a bit of them tomorrow. The EM apps is what you've already seen. These are meant to be quick to interaction, and so they're basically sort of GUI style interactions where you have slide bars and figures. The simulation notebooks, these are if you actually want to learn how to code forward simulation or an inversion using SimPeg. These notebooks show you all of the code. Don't really show much code. The simulation notebooks give you everything, and there's a bit of an explanation. And so I'll walk you through those probably tomorrow. So let's take a look at the EM apps. There's a few ways you can access them. If you're familiar with Git and GitHub and all that, and setting up a Python environment, you can download them from GitHub. What I recommend for most people is we'll run it from Microsoft Azure. And so what this is they actually have a cloud service where they will let you run Python computations using a Jupyter notebook live on the web. So if you're not familiar, Jupyter is the interactive computing environment that we were looking at before that the app is in. And I'll pull one up here. So this is what you'll see when you first come to the EM apps page. You'll notice that the run button is grayed out. And so what that means is you need to first sign in. And so it's free to get a Microsoft account. So you can just create one. So if you don't have to sign in, you can sign up. So we'll get logged in here. Okay, and then we'll see that we're signed in as Doug. Now the run button is still grayed out. So what we actually need to do is make a copy of this library for our own account. So this is kind of nice, actually. You want to make notes or things like that in your notebooks. Those will persist, so you'll be able to save your own notebooks there. Copy here with this clone button. And because Doug already has one, it's asking us, like, do you want to replace that? And we'll say, yes, that's fine. So it's just made a copy. And now we actually have an active run button. And so that means we can actually go ahead and start running these. And so I'll pull up the ones I showed earlier. Maybe I'll pull up the layer. So there's 25 notebooks, or 25 or 26 in total. So there's like 3 pages, so you can flip through and see what's there. The way that we've named them, they start with the method, so DC, or frequency domain, time domain, natural source, or lyrics. So you'll see the method, and then there's a bit of a description of what we're looking at. The layer and a cylinder in 2D. So in order to run it, the easiest thing to do, you see up top here, it says cell. Can you guys read that in the back? Yeah. So just right here, cell. So we'll do cell, and then run all. This guy here. So what that's going to do is just run each of these chunks of code just all at once. If you want to step through them, you can, and we'll go through that tomorrow. So all this is doing is it's going to just download the libraries from GitHub that it needs. So this EM examples library is one that we've been at UBC, and that is basically, it does all of the plotting and calls the simulations in SimPeg to actually do the computation of the currents, for example. So in each, we've tried to give a bit of some purpose statements, so telling you why this might be a useful app to use, show the setup, what each of the parameters are, and then provide a few questions that maybe get you started if you don't actually have something in mind of why you're looking at this. And then so once it's up and running, you can go ahead and see all the different pieces here. How we generated a lot of the figures from today. So this was the example where we have a resist near surface layer, and we can stick a conductive target underneath. So we've got a conductive target and a resistive layer here, and we can actually see before what we're looking at, if we look at the currents, where those are going. There we go. So these are a few examples that you can go ahead and play around with, and we'll probably pull up some more of them maybe later today and tomorrow. Are there any questions about that?
The audience is stunned. How's that? So the next section that we got has to do with inductive sources. And it's interesting, when we first started off, it was, I don't know, it's a moderate size folder. But then as we kept going on, we kept accumulating things, and now it's so big that we actually have to revert to a PDF as opposed to a PowerPoint because it can't even load on my computer. So anyway, there's lots of stuff. So what's our motivation? It's the same as we talked about before. We've got large areas. Maybe we're interested in near surface stuff. We have shielding problems, rugged terrain, all kinds of reasons to use some type of inductive source. So we're going to look at the basic setup, and then we're going to do both time and frequency domain. So again, these ever important questions, like what's the target? That's surface, depth, 1D, 2D, 3D. By transmitter, where is it? What's the waveform? What's the size, orientation? Always need to worry about exciting the target. That's the geometry, coupling. Receivers, what fields to measure, what instruments, where to collect the data, how many, all these things. These are actually all questions about survey design. So let's try to break it down just a little bit. So first of all, just remember the basic experiment. We have a transmitter, produces a primary magnetic field. Time-varying magnetic fields produce electric fields everywhere, and if it happens to be conductivity structure, we'll get currents. Those currents generate their own magnetic fields, and we can measure that. Transmitter, what are we going to use? Well, if we've got large areas or rugged terrain, it makes really good sense to use some kind of airborne system. So here's two. This one is a resolve system. That's being told there's a transmitter and receiver is in here. This is a frequency domain system, and this is a time domain system. So it's a big loop. It's like 30 meters in diameter, and it's being towed. So you can tow them with a helicopter or with a plane. If you got deep targets, then primarily you want to have some kind of large loop. I'm going to show you an example later on. This loop is a couple of kilometers on the side, so it's a big loop. Time or frequency, you could use either. It's not really that crucial as to which you use, but here's a frequency domain system, here's a time domain system. For both of them, the key factor is moment. That's your strength of your transmitter. And so that's the current times the area, that's what we showed before. But also you can wrap the number of coils around, so the number of turns increases the moment. And the magnetic field of that is going to look like. And the important part here is that you have to remember that the fields are going to fall off as 1 over r cubed. That's just a geometric attenuation. And then there's this other attenuation that we talked about with respect to fields propagating in the background, so just attenuating. You want to be as close to the ground or to your target as possible. So the closest you can get is if you actually had a transmitter on the ground. The next is helicopter, and then the final is a fixed wing. So these are progressively going up. And you're always concerned about coupling. So your receivers and the data, again, we talked about measuring the B field directly with a magnetometer, say flux state, or voltages with coils measuring dB/dt. In the time domain, the good advantage of this is that the primary field is an off time. So here's your current and off, and then you measure everything in the off time. So you're only measuring secondary responses. This is a huge advantage to time domain systems. And the receivers could be mounted above the transmitter. You actually have a receiver here. You actually have also another receiver on there. So they can be mounted on the transmitter loop or above it. In this case, this is actually helisound data. The loop is on the ground, and the receiver is in the air. It's a total field magnetometer, and it's being flown across this line. So it's kind of interesting. You just have a transmitter loop on the ground, and then you're flying a straight line over top of it. The frequency domain, the big difference here is that the primary field is always on. And unfortunately, that primary field is large compared to any secondary field. So if you're going to make any sense out of the data, you've got to get rid of that primary field. You can either compute it and subtract it, or, and this is commonly used, you have a bucking coil. So here's your transmitter, here's your receiver, and you have a little coil here that gives rise to a magnetic flux that's equal and opposite to the primary. So what that does, it basically cancels out the effects of that primary field, and you're measuring essentially the secondary field. In a frequency domain system, often have separate transmitters and receivers for each frequency. So here you can see we've got 5 different sets of coils. And there's 5 different frequencies that are associated with that. And the coils could be coplanar, or they could be coaxial. So and this one and this one have the same, or on the same axis. This is a common instrument. I'm not sure anybody here familiar with this guy at EM31. Can use for site characterization, geotechnical types of stuff. It's got a it's a loop system. Got a transmitter at one end, frequency, and a receiver. So given that, now you've got a question about where to collect data, how accurate. These things kind of come down to like, okay, what's the footprint of our transmitter? And all of these things come into that survey design aspect. So what we're going to do is we're going to step through a little bit of things here with a time domain system. So the current is on, and it switches off, and then you're going to do some measurements in that off time. If you're going to measure a B field, it would just be decaying like that. A dB/dt would have an impulse, and so the footprint of your system really depends upon your transmitter and whatever waveform you're using, the time or frequency. So, I mean, what you're really interested in is like, where's the currents? The currents tell you everything about what's going on. So if you figure out where the currents are, then that tells you, like in this case here, you're kind of illuminating these 2 regions up here. You're not illuminating down here on the axis, you're not illuminating. We're going to use, first of all, a simple case of just a loop source over homogeneous curve. Just look at the currents, how strong they are, and how they depend upon conductivity, and what the resultant magnetic fields look like, because that's what we're going to measure. So here it is. Our Earth is like a 3D cube, and we can look at things either in cross-section, or we can look at it in a horizontal plane in plan view. And what we're going to do is to have a system. Notice this is VMD, which stands for vertical magnetic dipole. So a loop gave rise to a magnetic field, and that's going to be, if the loop is horizontal, then the magnetic field is pointing like this. So VMD is that. So let's look at a particular time. So what we're going to do is we've got a current on, and then we're going to measure things up here. So this is at 0.01 milliseconds. And so now what's going to happen? Remember, the transmitter is just a loop of current like this, right? So the moment I turn that off, there's going to be a current that's induced in the Earth. And those currents are going to be traveling in the same horizontal plane. That's what this shows you. Here's a plan view of the currents, and you can see at this particular time, there's a maximum current density that's going around like this, but the currents are all circular, so they're just flowing in that same geometry. If I get a cross section, I've got something like this. So now the currents are going into the board. They're coming out, so that they're like this, so that they're circular in that direction. And notice also, like, where's the maximum current? Well, the maximum currents are something in here. So if you're going to measure the magnetic fields from that, magnetic fields look like. You can get some idea. Remember, so if you have a little loop of current, then the magnetic fields are like a dipole. So the strongest magnetic fields you might expect, well, I'm going to give you a choice. The strongest magnetic field is going here, 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 or up here. So 1, 2, 3, or 4. We're going to see the strongest magnetic fields. Look, how many fingers?
Just 3.
1, 2, 3. Anybody agree? Disagree? Gold star. Yes. Yeah, so my strongest magnetic fields are going to be kind of where those currents are. Here's my magnetic fields, the strongest here. Everywhere look like this, but my receiver is up here, so I'm doing magnetic fields. But the currents are inside the Earth. So now let's look at what happens as a function of time. So at early time, 0.002 milliseconds. So remember, I'm talking time, so I've got a diffusion distance of 18 meters. And if I look at the currents, so this is 50 meters, so 18 meters is kind of in that direction here. And if I look at the strength of the currents, they're sort of maximum here and here, so they're going in. If I look a little bit later, now you can see what happened to the currents. They're now down here. Just 30. A little bit later, they're like this. Later, they're like that. So what have the currents done? The currents have kind of diffused downward and outward. And to summarize, it looks they look like this. So early, later, and later. The currents diffuse downwards and outwards. How many people have seen this particular diagram? Oh, it's very famous. It was done by this guy, Misak and Abidian. way back in 1979, because when time domain systems first came out, people were trying to understand, like, okay, where's the currents and how do I represent them? And Misak and Bigian said, oh, well, and he showed it mathematically, that you could represent this, the resultant magnetic field as kind of like a smoke ring, a current system, a filament current that kind of went down and upward. And it's the same kind of thing with a cigarette, right? You blow out a circular ring, right? And it kind of upward. It's actually the same kind of thing. So you kind of refer to these as smoke rings. And this is his representation for the maximum current. So you can see how that kind of follows along. So that's where that comes from. But for people, you can't get too caught up in smoke rings because there's the real currents. They're distributed all over. So here's some important points. First of all, the currents flow in the same plane as the transmitter currents. They diffuse downwards, and each transmitter has got a footprint. So that's the important thing. Where's the currents from the transmitter? And also there's a question about resolution. People always ask, okay, what's the resolution? Well, the maximum resolution is going to be at the earliest time. The currents are going to be concentrated at the surface. So here's the currents. That gives you some idea about resolution. And certainly you can even see from here, if you had a conductor in here versus here versus here versus here, you're probably not going to distinguish them very much. So you can see how the currents have kind of spread out. And so your maximum resolution occurs at the earliest time, and the latest resolution, or the latest time channel, actually kind of controls the depth of investigation. So if you look at your earliest time channel, that's really sensitive stuff that's happening right, and that's going to be your best resolving power. And then at a later time, it's just a question of, okay, how far down have my currents migrated so that I'm still getting some current down here, so I've got some sensitivity. It's kind of smeared out, but there's something. Okay? Now let's look at something that's just a little bit more interesting. We're going to take that same Earth and we're going to put in here, 20 meters thick, and we're going to change its resistivity. We're going to make it resistive, and then we're going to make it conductive. And we want to try to figure out, okay, what's going to happen. So first of all, here's what it looks like in the background. Now suppose in this region in here, I put in a resistive layer. Okay? What do you think? I'm putting in a resistive layer. Currents stay up. Anybody else? It's got a bus. Currents stay up, currents pass through. Anybody else?
Depends of the difference between the different resistivity for each. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just going to take this background, I'm just going to make one, just change it, so it's going to make one layer resistive. It's going to go what?
The current is going to be there.
The current's going to stay on top like in DC. So I wasn't sure I quite understood.
Yeah, but what is the resistivity?
Oh, I can make it quite resistive. I'm going to make it 1,000 ohms, so that's like 10 more resistive. So So I put a 1,000-meter layer.
What's anyway will be it's going the magnetic field will induce currents down there, even though there is a huge layer. So the magnetic field will pass.
That's right. So this is actually what happens. The layer in here. So my current here, there's still an electric field in here, but because it is so high, there's no currents. And so actually there's no attenuation and we get currents in here. In fact, we get more currents down here than we did in the homogeneous medium. Because in there, things get attenuated. Okay? So this is the really good news about with a resistor, right? We basically are going to be able to see through that. If I make it, so what's going to happen if I make it conductive? I make it conductive, what's going to happen? Right, so now, I should have showed that you're actually fast. Okay. So if I make this a conductive layer, then here's where the currents are actually concentrated in that conductive layer. And if I make it even more conductive, not only the currents concentrating, they can't even get through. Okay, so now you start to really kind of get the swing of things here, right? So if I've got a resistive layer, things just go blasting right through, there's no attenuation. If I've got anything that's conductive, currents get induced, and they attenuate, and depending upon how conductive they are, I might not even see through that layer. So the magnetic fields look like that for each of those cases. More complicated structures, but in each of them we can see something. Generally, what's more informative is the sounding curve. So if you get somebody to do a time domain survey for you, they're going to give you sounding curves. And what those are is basically the measured response as a function of time. You see here's our background. This is basically voltages up here, and this is time. So this is 3 orders of magnitude, and this is 7 orders of magnitude. One thing about electromagnetics is you get very large changes, or magnitude change in response. If I put that resistive layer in, then with that resistive layer, I get a dashed line. And then compare that to this guy here, and there's very much difference. So that's telling you that from a sounding curve perspective, you don't really see that resistive layer. Then I make a conductive layer. Now look at the difference between with that layer, with the conductive or not. And if you make it really conductive, there's just huge change. So an inductive source time domain system is very sensitive to finding. This is one reason why, like a time domain survey, to be able to find a solid water freshwater interface is great, or to find a mineral deposit that's conductive, massive sulfide of some sort. That works really well. Example of an airborne survey, over a very sphere. So what we look at is, first of all, the map. So these are all locations of where sounding is taking place. So each of these places there's sounding. And at any line, let's say across here, across the center of the sphere, we can have a data profile. So at the very earliest time, 0.02 milliseconds, these are the data, and we just, early time, we're just seeing that half space. A little bit later, signals dropped a lot. Notice that we've got a little bit of a bump. Where in dimensions, you can start to see that there's something being pulled out of the background here, right? So we start to see that. It's kind of a sweet spot. At 0.3 milliseconds, we see this. And on the profile view, later, now everything starts up, so the currents are in a sphere, they're starting to attenuate, and signal is dying. And a bit later, we're back to homogeneous. So, in summary, then, for this airborne example, what we see is as a function of time, so everything is diffusing in, the sphere gets ignited at a particular point, there's currents in the sphere, and then those gradually decay. As a function of time, we get this as far as plan view maps, as a function of profile. So some time domain systems out there. Here's one, SkyCam. It's got a transmitter loop that's like this, about 300 square meters. It actually has two modes. There's a high moment. Remember, moment had to do with the current times the area, right? And number of turns. So this got 4 turns. 90 amperes maximum. And the waveform goes up like this, and then it's a steep ramp down, and then you measure all of these time intervals up here. They also have a low moment system. This, and then it shuts off quickly and go down. Some important differences here. High moment system, and you try to turn that thing off, you can't do it quickly. There's a response. There's a back EMF that's going in. You simply cannot turn that current off quickly enough, and the result of that is that the earliest time channel that you can measure is 47 microseconds. Compare that to a low moment system. You can now turn that off much more quickly, and you can get back to 12 microseconds. So the earlier time you get, the closer the currents are to the sort of the higher the resolution. So if you're trying to look really near surface, you want to be looking very early in time. The next systems that are coming out, they're getting down to about 4 microseconds. And one of these days, we're going to see 1 microsecond airborne systems. The difference between 1 microsecond and 10 microseconds is huge as far as determining the near surface. So, as a client perspective, if you're interested in really near surface, it's this information here, the low system, that's going to be really useful. If you're looking at depth, you need to get power down to that target, and so you want to have a high mode. And generally kind of flip back and forth between these two things, and ultimately you're going to invert them all together. There's a whole bunch of different systems out there. Here's a VTEM system. You see it's still kind of a circular loop, that's transmitter. And here's your receiver in the center, also carrying a magnetometer. The waveform is a bit different. It's more like a half sine, sort of a shallow ramp off. And then you measure here. So you measure different time channels. The waveform is a bit different. At a fundamental level, these things are not very much different. At a practical level, there are some differences. From a user perspective, what's really important, what's very important, in fact, it's crucial, is know exactly what the waveform is and when they're starting to show. Without that information, you cannot invert the data very accurately. So that information is crucial. So if somebody's going to do an airborne survey for you, make sure they provide the waveform as well as all the details about how that is going to come out. Okay, so let's look at the case history. Here's one that I like for a variety of reasons. Talk about that in the setup here. So this is a region in Denmark. It's called Kasted. So here's Denmark. Here's the region. And what is of interest here is trying to understand basically where fresh water can exist. So there's Paleocene clays underneath, okay, and then there was these gouges that happened sort of to make channels, okay? And then those channels are basically filled with sands and gravels and sometimes intermittent clays. But the bottom line is that the fresh water is all in those channels, and so that's the prime thing that you want to find is the base of these guys. Okay? That's number one. The second is if you could take information from electromagnetics and have that converted to just the lithologies that are in here, then you could generate effectively a hybrid geode model that could be used in a variety of cases. And the one that I'm going to talk about, and this is one that comes above, is that let's suppose you put a well in here, okay, and you pump water coming up. So, where's it coming from? Is it coming from here, or here, here? Where's it coming from? So that's an important question, right? Have another well over here, you pump water out of here. Do those two wells talk to each other? Like, each are pulling water out. Is there any kind of interconnection? Those are really practical problems. And as I said, the reason I like this particular case history is that it sheds some light on that kind of problem, and I think is ultimately how geophysics, is practically used. Nobody cares about the electrical resistivity structure, but they do care about translating that to something that is informative. So we need to know physical properties. There's quite a few little different lithologic units here, but the basic is that we've got these Paleocene clays underneath here that are conductive. So they are anywhere 1 to 10 ohm meters. So that's really conductive. And you compare that with any of these other guys here that have sands and gravels and tills. Those are more like 60 ohm meters. And there's a few things in between. So we're really looking for the top of a conductor, which from an electromagnetic perspective, that's great. That's the goal. So we're going to do a survey. We'll do a SkyCam survey. Here was the transmitter. And then the receiver is sitting right up here. There's a high mode, a low mode system, and we're going to use both. Data, these are the lines along here, the data effect. So each little blue dot represents a sounding. Some of them have been edited out because they were just too noisy. But in the end, I think there was something like 9,500 soundings that were still there. And what was done for inversion is to basically do a 1D inversion. So that's pretty straightforward. You just have a sounding curve, put it on the resistivity, 25 layers, and go ahead and do that. The thing that is a little bit more sophisticated than that is that those 1D soundings are all kind of tied to each other. So I do a sounding here, and there's a sounding at this place, but we can't vary too much. We should be somehow interconnected. So, Lindsay, you, self, things could vary locally, but not extremely. So the result of that was now we have a 3D volume, okay, of electrical resistivity, and we can plot that up. So here's a slice at 5 meters above sea level. So this is the resistivity. So the purples are really resistant, and the blues are really low resistivity, or they're conductive. So these are probably indicative of the clays, those Paleocene clays, and these are likely the sands and gravels. So we look at a depth model, and so this is now the approximate depth to the top of that Paleogene clay. Top, and these blue numbers in here indicate that we've got a really big incision. These go down like 120 meters. Okay. So this is now starting to give you a structural geology map of what's going on and interpreting, okay, where the top of that clay layer is. So with that, and they come along and they do a kind of geologic interpretation of finding about 20 odd valleys and valley structures here in which the groundwater would be contained. Now they do one more thing, and this is that next step. At each of these locations up here, well, not each, but at some of them, they work and they measure the electrical resistivity and they correlate that with the lithology. Resistivity gives rise to a certain lithology. You know the lithology, and with the work that they've done, they know the hydraulic conductivity. So that's the ease with which water can. So now we put all that together and we construct a hydraulic conductivity model. Perfect. Got a three-dimensional hydraulic conductivity. You put that into a program called like ModFlow or something like that, and now you can start to happening. So if I pump a certain amount of water out here, where it's coming from, and here you see this is actually what this happens. So you pump out here, and it's not coming from here, it's actually coming from this region in here. Moreover, if you pump out here, kind of, and maybe there's a little bit of crosstalk. But that's the kind of information that's really useful now, because now you do, it's like reservoir monitoring or reservoir simulation. You decide to pump up here, where are you drawing from, how much you're one well talking to. So it's very simple. So that's the case history number one. Let me also show this one. This is another case history. It was done by Danielle Colombo in 2016, so it's actually pretty recent. And I'll show you the setup. Here's the region. So it's in Saudi Arabia, and the area is really the focus is on trying to find these stratigraphic traps that exist. So there's a region here about 20 kilometers on the side that the seismic was having a very difficult time working with, really because of just a whole bunch of background things. The sand dunes, so you can see all of these features that are sort of extrapolated down from the surface, or there could be karsts. You can see how that kind of messes up the reflections, or there's a deep, muddy, old river valley that is kind of washing things out. So that's what the seismic sections were like, even after they'd done their best static removal. So the interesting thing here is that they actually try to do a number of things in jointly or cooperatively inverting both the seismic and the electromagnetics. And the main thing that they found was that both the P wave velocity, okay, and the electrical conductivity were really functions of porosity, and more importantly, that there was a strong similarity in the structure between the resistivity sections and the seismic sections. So what they're going to do is basically, because of that, they're going to fly electromagnetics and then try to find the electrical resistivity structure, and then they'll use that structure in an inversion, cooperative inversion, to get a better seismic velocity model, and then they do their statics, and then off they go. Okay, so that's the essence. The survey is a heli-TEM, so it's a slightly different time domain. We've got transmitter down here and receiver up there. Really is a half sine waveform, and so here's your input waveform, and then you're going to measure on the off time. And yeah, here's about 1.6 million soundings there, and yeah, the peak amplitude, peak current in here was about over 1,000 amperes. So these things there's a lot of power going in. And the curves are stacked so that there's actually a sounding curve about every 2.5 meters. So that's a lot of soundings. One of the things that you're interested in doing when you're flying in an aircraft, and okay, so I'm getting resistivity up at that level. What is it like if I compare it to the ground? And this is what happened both over a conductive area and a resistive area, that those two things are pretty much about the same. So that gives you some confidence. Here's an apparent resistivity map for the EM data. So you can see that there's this kind of structure that's going in here. And if you look at the seismic time slice, this I think is a dramatic image. Is that you can see that the shapes of these two things are pretty similar. So that gives you some kind of an idea that resistivity and seismic are going to give complementary information. So what they're going to do is they're going to process the EM data. Again, it's going to be 1D inversions, lateral constraints, and that's going to give a conductivity for resistivity structure that looks like this. So blue is conductive and red is resistive. And this region here is kind of outlining the boundary of that line. There's quite a few ways we can do it. I don't want to go into any of these, but the general idea, and you'll hear about this, is that people are going to do joint inversion with structure. So you'll see this in quite a few different occurrences, and all that means is that these two properties are going to be related in such a way that the change is going to occur at the same boundary. So how the seismic velocity is changing or how the conductivity is changing, but if there's a structural fault right at Anna, then that's where it's going to happen. Both things are going to change. One might go up, the other might go down, or whatever. And so that's the underlying idea. You can also do something that's more complicated by introducing a rock model that ties these two things together. But the basic is inversion structure. So here's they're doing velocity analysis with tomography, and here is the heat wave velocity at 300 meters below sea level without any EM, and here's heat wave velocity with the. So you can see how it's got rid of a lot of artifact structure in here, how it's cleaned things up, and if you look at a cross section from A to A prime, so across here, the conductivity looks like this, the P wave velocity without EM looks like that, and the P wave velocity with looks like that. So this is actually a much cleaner section for the seismic velocity. So then if you convert that to statics, here's the estimated statics, without EM, here's the statics with EM. And again, you can just sort of see how you clean things up. And if you look at the sections, the cross sections, without EM, you end up with this is a seismic section, where with EM, so again, in some places you can see you kind of really clean this, clean the. So it's definitely. So with the the pre-stack depth migration, again tend to look at with EM versus with EM. So you can really see again how you've cleaned this region up in here with the EM. So as interpretation and the synthesis goes, you do the EM, use that in a cooperative sense with the tomographic inversions to get a better seismic velocity. You improve that near surface velocity. That gives you improved statics. Improved statics corrects the stuff underneath and it helps the indicator. Okay, so that was time domain. So the goal there was to time domain method and two examples. So the questions? Yeah.
I have a question. Do you know if they verify the resistivity with resistivity measured from wells?
Actually, I don't know that. Yeah, the only thing that the comparison that was made was the conductivity from something on the surface versus conductivity from the air. So. Okay, so let's do frequency domain. Either that or 10 jumping jacks to help you with it. Now we're going to do EM, but in the frequency domain. So we're probably not going to expect too much difference. Remember, in the time domain, we had a transmitter that went off, and that was our data. Frequency domain is always on. We're going to go through the same scenario that we did for time, but it's going to be exactly the same, so we can go through it pretty quickly. So here's our homogeneous model, right? And we've got our vertical magnetic dipole. Now it has frequency domain. We're going to look at the current densities. Now this is at a particular frequency. This is 10 kilohertz. And if we do that, again, we expect that our currents are going to be going circular, just the same as they were before. And if we look at this geometry, here's the currents that are up here. They're close to the surface. And the magnetic field, again, is strongest here. But we're actually measuring over here. And then as far as effects of frequency, what do we expect? For high frequency, should we look at shallow or deep? Shallow. So high frequency, 100 kilohertz, that's looking here at factor of 10 less, we're doing here. So, the same kind of thing. Lower frequencies, we see deeper, larger. So skin depth is important here, right? So high frequencies see shallow, lower frequencies see deeper. Magnetic fields can be complicated, but there's signal up here. And now we're going to do that same thing with respect to a layer. So here is a 100 ohm meter background. That's what the currents look like. If I put in a resistor in here, you can see that you won't have the same on this. This doesn't show up quite a lot, but we're actually getting a little bit more information here than we were here. If we put a conductive layer in, we start to see a lot of currents in here. And if we make it very conductive, they're basically open. So we're interested in the magnetic flux. So again, very different magnetic fields, but all are sensitive to them. And here's the more diagnostic image. So here we're back to the sounding curves. But now they're different than timing because now we've got two. We've got a real and imaginary. So the real part is the black, the imaginary part. So this is what happens if you just have that uniform space. If you have a resistor, again, you just don't see much difference. So this is frequency. It's 3 orders of magnitude in frequency. And we don't see a resistor. But you put a conductor in and you see major changes. If you put a big conductor in, you see huge changes. So now we come back to the shielding problem. So remember, for this, we had a resistive layer here, and the goal was to see the target. And here's where we were this morning. In resistor, then all of the current was channeled above it for a DC problem, like this. And we had apparent resistivity. Now, we were shielded. So now the question is, can we over a huge problem with the DC, right? So we just couldn't see it. So what's going to happen now for our EMs? Are we shielded or not? Not shielded? Anybody? Everybody not shielded? By this time, everybody should say not shielded. So we're not going to be affected by a resistor, right? We've just shown that. So if I look at this, so here's the background without anything. Now I put in a resistor in here. I got the same currents. So without that resistor, I got some currents up here, right? So there's some attenuating. This conductor. But I see this. I see this sphere, and if I put the resistive layer in, basically the same thing. So that resistive layer is completely invisible. And now if we actually try to kind of look at the E soundings with the resistive layer, we can see that with the sphere, okay, with the resistive layer or not, that's the difference between these X's and the dashes. I get basically the same sounding. So that's great news, right? You got a DC resistivity, you got a high resistive layer, you're hooked. But if you use an inductive method, you can actually see through that resistor, and it might be okay. So those are like really important takeaway messages. So what about a conductor? Remember, for a conductor, for DC resistivity, that's what we have now. What's going to happen? Yeah, we're still. That's right. We should still be shielded, right? It's a conductor, and if I put a conductor in here, all my energy is going to be carried up by that conductive layer. And so this is what we had just with the sphere. If I put a conductive layer in, I basically lost the current in the sphere, and there's just you're moved again. So the inductive methods are not going to allow us to see through something that's really conductive because that's what we're doing. But they can help us see through. So I'm going to do one more case history that has to do with groundwater. This is a place in Australia called Buenos. This down here. Yeah. What we're looking at here, this is a river. It's called the Murray River. Up here is irrigation that's elevated. This is a floodplain that's in here. And the problem has been that it's from irrigation, gone down here and they've salinized the region and lost some habitat. We worked on this at UBC for quite some time. When Lindsay and I were in Australia, we were flying from Adelaide to Brisbane, and we realized, like, okay, so here's Adelaide over here, Brisbane's over here. We're going to be flying over the Murray River, right? So that was pretty exciting because we worked on this thing. These images. So when we got on the plane, we asked, that's the flight attendant, if the plane actually flew over the river, and we see, she said, no problem, just probably in 15 minutes you'll be able to see it. So there we were, you're sitting, kind of wondering when we should look out the window. And then the pilot comes on. So it's the pilot announced, yeah, and those people from Canada, if you want to see the Murray River, it's just down on the left, right? Look out the window. And there was look exactly what this is. Maybe you can see. Anyway, yeah, so if you actually looked on the floodplain, you see stuff like this. So that's just vegetation with salt coming up. And so what they thought they would try to do is to see, first of all, if they could reclaim this, and secondly, if you had other circumstances, how you might be able to clean this up. Right? So the bottom line at this point is salt's coming down. It's a bad situation. Can I clean it up, or can I go to some other areas and make sure this doesn't happen? What they decide to do is that they put in some wells here, okay? And so here's a well, and they drew water up. So this would be saline water. And they stored it in these storage ponds up here. And then they let it evaporate. So that, that would give you salt that's in there. The other is that in regions, let's say out in here, they pumped in fresh water. So now they're trying to push salt back. So effectively, they're trying to repopulate this area with fresh water and put the saline water there and pump it out. Big project, right? But wanted to see what you could do. So here's some of the plans. This is the region that they were going to pump water in, and they first of all, before they started doing any of that, they did electrical resistivity. So this is the DC resistivity experiment. And they ended up with this as a cross-section of the resistivity. The blue is resistant. So the red is basically salt. That was in 2006. In March 2007, after having pumped fresh water in here, they had made this impact. So there's fresh water that was extending back to this region here. So I mean, at some level, the experiment is working. What you really want to know, however, is like what's the electrical resistivity of that whole area. And for that, we first of all need to decide what survey we're going to use. We've got to go back and look at physical properties. So here's where that transect was that I was showing you. But they also did salinity measurements. So they pumped water out and looked at how saline it was and what the electrical conductivity was. And so these blue lines are fresh, and that's quite resistant, 0.01 Siemens per meter. And the red is saline water, 3 to 5 Siemens per meter. So a number of orders of magnitude difference. So basically, that's what you're looking at, difference between conductive and resistant. And for those people I was talking about earlier with respect to saline water and fresh water and southern organic, it would be the same. System that was used was a resolve system. So this is a frequency domain system. It's got horizontal coplanar coils like this, and at 5 frequencies vary between 130,000 hertz. So that's what you're flying. And these are the flight lines. Actually, there was both time domain, SkyTem, and resolve here, and they both give pretty similar results. So this is a picture, this is an image that I really like to show at this point. And the reason for that is that you can kind of use it as a, I don't know, as a metric or as a calibrator to how much you know now at whatever time it is, compared to where you were at 9 o'clock this morning. So imagine coming in at 9 o'clock this morning, okay, and just try to take 10 seconds and say, okay, what it meant to you? And you've got 4 pictures, a couple of graphs, some real, some imaginary, some hertzes. And what information would that have conveyed to you at 9 o'clock this morning? You don't have to tell me, you think about it, just keep shaking your hands. Okay. Okay. Now I want you to contrast that with what you know right now. Okay, so let's pick it up from the top. HCP, horizontal coplanar data. What's that? Too close? Horizontal, right? We can do this. That's good. These guys here, 380 hertz, 36,000 hertz. What do those guys mean, and how do they translate into something? First of all, which of those frequencies sees near surface, and which sees deeper? Good. Higher frequency is seeing closer, right? Seeing deeper, and the kind of formula or the concept is kind of quantifies how deep you're seeing. It's kind of skin depth, right? So you'd have to know some idea about what the what the conductivity was, but then it might give you an idea of skin depth. Okay, so that's good. And now I've got pictures like this, in phase and quadrature phase. So I've really got single, and so I've got this high secondary to primary. So I must have high values of the conductive material. So you just look at these maps and say, oh well, these regions in here must be conductive compared to those regions. Okay. Then you've got the real and imaginary. Right? So at Fox 1, you may not have known that, but now you realize, oh, that's just, I've got some kind of a signal, I'm just partitioning it into a part that's in phase with my primary part that's out of phase. That's it. Okay. So I get something that looks like this. Take here, response curve and sounding curve. What are those guys? Right? Well, this response curve just tells you how, basically, how things are going to get partitioned, right? In phase, this is quadrature phase, and kind of depending, what induction number and how that, what that response could be. And here's my sounding curve. That's daytime, right? So I'm at, I think, okay, I'm at a particular location. And the relationship between my in phase and my quadrature phase, the relative weights of those two things at different frequencies. So I get a curve that looks like this. Does that mean anything to you from the point of view of, well, how would you kind of reconcile this with this response curve?
That the induction number changes with the frequency in a way that it's 1. I is different.
Right. So there's, I think you're almost there, and maybe we're kind of saying the same thing. Notice here, as we go higher in frequency, that means higher in induction curve, that this curve goes up, and higher frequencies, this curve goes down. So that's exactly what you expect at this side here, right? So notice the real part's going up, and the imaginary part is going down. So this curve here is actually really reflective of something that's going on kind of right in here. In other words, you're in a region where there is a really good conductor, and most of your responses are actually getting into that real part. So that's a lot, right? I mean, if you think about it, now you look at this slide, and there's just all kinds of things that are at least not completely foreign. Right? You've got some connection with almost everything on that slide. And I think from the point of view of anybody who's interacting with EM people, if you get to that stage, then actually you've made a lot of progress, because then you're kind of with the person as far as what he's trying to tell you, and also you can ask questions. So now we take those data, we invert them. Again, do 1D inversion processing, stitch together, and get a conductivity model that looks like this. So higher conductivity is here, lower there. And now the way to how that is interpreted is that there's actually highly conductive material salts that are moving in this way. There's this portion of the river that's really gaining on those salts. There's other portions where the fresh water is flooding out. So that's important from understanding the dynamics of this river are going and how that's interacting with that fertilizer that's coming. And yeah, so this is the synthesis. So you got irrigation up here, stuff's coming down, and now there's certain parts of the river that are becoming salinized, and that salt's going to flow downstream. And there's other parts that fresh water is going. Yeah, maybe I'll show, what time is it? Completely lost my time. Okay, so let me just do this. I think probably what we'll get to is grounded source, and then we'll do visual sources and other things. I want to show you this example. We traveled to Tokyo, and we did this. I have a good friend, Yuji Mitsupata, and he is the head of the Institute of AIS. He is the advanced institute for geophysics. And I asked him, I said, what are you guys doing here, right? And he said, well, here's our brochure. And that brochure was this. And I took a look at that and I thought, that's the disk, right? So here's stuff on their front brochure. And you can see what's there. Okay, so we've got exploration for oil, natural gas. We've got a seafloor and EM experiment, okay, looking for methane hydrates. There's a groundwater saltwater interface here. So interested in where that seawater is coming. Factories up here, so there's soil and groundwater contamination. There's mining, so there's acid mine draining. There's geothermal energy, heat source here, power plant, there's hot springs. The ground, radioactive waste disposal, CO2 sequestration, there's water deposits, and aquifer storage. Right? It's just like these are problems that are kind of connected with the information that we have to talk about in this. And anyway, they're just sitting right on the front cover of their brochure that they hand out to the general public. One of the things that they're currently working on is kind of, so there was a earthquake in Japan. And there was this landslide, and Earth kind of came down, landslide, and it covered a number of cars, burying them from sort of 1 to 3 meters deep. And they realized that they didn't have a system to rapidly deploy and find where these cars are. So they wanted to build something, and they're going to build exactly what we were just talking about, but they're going to do it on a smaller scale. And what they want to use is a drone technology. So essentially, they're going to build something that looks like this, which just looks like that resolve system we're talking about. And a helicopter will be replaced by a drone. So this is what they have. So the system that they're working with has got transmitter coils and receiver coils, so it's the same, operates at multiple frequencies. But an important point here is that you have to have data that are not so noisy. And the aircraft, in this case a drone, can cause a substantial amount of noise. That's why in all of those helicopter surveys that we show, that transmitter and receiver are a long ways away from the helicopter because the helicopter's making more noise. They had to experiment with that, and they first tried being like 3 meters away, 3 meters distance, and the noise curve looked like the black. That was too noisy. They did 4 meters, looked like the red, and at 5 meters, got down here. So you have to be 5 meters away from the drone in order to get rid of that noise. Okay. So the next thing has to do with data acquisition. And now you have to remember that your system has to be close to the ground. Your primary field falls off as 1 over r cubed. And then any fields from here also fall off as 1 over r cubed. So you need to be close. So that means you have to try to fly the thing pretty close to the ground. Now for the data acquisition and interpretation, they're actually looking for a big conductor. And remember, in a big conductor, the response function reduction number is all in the real part. So then they basically just use the real part of the data. And so they flew this drone. Maybe here's the flight paths. Kind of probably some kid with good figures on a joystick to do that. They came out pretty well. They plotted the real part. And here you go. So there's this great big X here. So that's a high response here. And that, that was one. Actually, that was one of the cars. And then there's a weaker response here. That is also a second car. So this is 1.5 meters. But the reason we're doing that is multiple. First of all, it's interesting. But secondly, you can see that all the principles that we just used for this bigger thing resolve are all the same, right? You just see things when you're miniaturizing. And that's one of the great things about electromagnetics, because you can make things that are really small, and you can also make things that are really big. But the physics behind it is exactly the same, which is why it's so important to understand fundamentals. Okay, so what I think, here's where we are. So we're going, I think, maybe okay. We've done DC resistivity, we've done fundamentals, we've done inductive forces. What I now want to do is do that next leap, and we're going to do grounded sources. So this is going to join both of those guys, and we'll kind of work our way through this. And this you'll find this really interesting because, first of all, it takes both concepts that we've already had and puts them together, which is interesting. And secondly, CSEM and a lot of other things actually depend on this. So understanding what's going on here can be quite important for a lot of applications. So let's take a quick coffee break, and we're probably only going to go till about 5, I think. That's initially we were planning till 6, but we'll go through. We'll see how we do, but we'll definitely get through the ground sources, and then if we actually do the MT and the natural sources today or begin that tomorrow. Let's just see how everybody's doing. There's a lot of material, and for people who are new, it's a lot of stuff to digest. Today meetings I cannot go. Cheers. Okay. Oh, we've got one refuses, so I think that's probably more.
Ah, se puede ir ahí. Ah, todo para atrás.
Hace formación, toma el jugo. Tiene una autonomía de ahí.
No, nada. No te sirve.
Sí, no, tiene un botón de pánico. Cuando la batería se está acabando, automáticamente, sí, sí, automáticamente con voz, el botón.
Hace la cuenta de cuánto te estás pegando y el número.
Ya, por caso fue tu no, tremendo. Siempre pasa.
Sí, voy a andar a encontrarlo.
Sí.
Y sí, bueno, no se te pasa. Y sí, nivelado además. Coquitos, ¿no?
Sí, yo estaba viendo de reojo esa, una pista bárbara.
Bueno, está. El protocolo dice que los 5 minutos. Sí, que quedar todo. Está buenísimo. Y no parecen pesadas, parecen más light. Dentro de una ensaladita de fruta. Porque si no, y no.
Eso durante la mañana.
No, creo que a la mañana va a terminar la teoría, dijo, y a la tarde va a seguir con casos.
Lo que nosotros queremos es que están trabajados y trabajamos en algo de eso. Hay que mostrar alguna necesidad.
Luego salía para afuera, compramos algo y se fue acá y
Pizza Ubi. Pizza Ubi.
no, a la otra, hay otro artista. No, y si no, ¿acaso le ponen
Ah, sí.
bueno, al lado de otro que
Si tenemos una sola hora, allí.
no, porque eso hay lugares para comprar sándwiches, tantas, o eso, y nosotros salimos a 6:30, porque salimos a la 1, salimos 6:30, a la 1 está media hora, no puedes ir a buscar.
Sí, voy a buscar. Bueno, espera, si no hace el caso,
Es que
a la
y soy 20.
Are you doing?
Yes. Yes, Ron. Because we can have 8 a.m.
Yeah, no, I'm doing pretty good. I know that listening is important. It's a lot of work.
Yes, and
A handful of 8-hour courses every 10 days. It's a lot. I'm glad that most everybody's able to stay for 2 days because otherwise it's just like it's a champ.
You all right yesterday?
Oh, yeah. It's nice.
Only to the side.
We were in Mexico City for this, and then Buenos Aires. So we leave tomorrow night. So it's pretty quick. Normally we've tried to schedule it so that we do the course, and then a few days to go see the city and relax. But we're in Santiago presenting on Thursday and Friday. So we wanted to be there on tomorrow night, so that at least we've got a day to sleep in a little bit, get fresh.
No, it's just one of those short flight.
Yeah.
2 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, it's more so just like time and
You're flying by night or?
we'll get there around 10.
So no, if you fly during the day, you can see the whole mountain range.
Oh, that would have been nice. Yeah.
and then you go to Santa Cruz, and then
Yes, and then to Rio.
So you've been there.
Yeah, we're doing a lot in 3 weeks. Well,
Are you-
total 4 weeks.
Are you taking a few days in Rio?
Yes, yeah. We try to at least one day as a tourist everywhere. Here we almost got sort of 1.5 or 2, which is nice. We sort of need 1 day to prep for the course, and then there's 2 days of the course. We need a little bit of time to recover. So, yeah.
You can relax.
Yeah, exactly. They have to take advantage of wherever we are. It's not a flight into many of these places.
Did you catch the bus or something?
No, but we've done a lot of walking. Yeah, lots of walking.
Yeah, very interesting.
I'm here.
It is, yes.
Like Tokyo and everything.
Yeah, I didn't go to China. Doug and Soggy went to China. So Soggy did the.
Yeah, el café lo trae
And then I
Pues supone que
Trato de ofrecer. Bueno, no,
I did
So we're not ignorant.
No problem. No.
It's in Canada.
It's in Canada. Yeah.
Claro, eso es muy difícil, no vale. Because because we used to work and now we changed the computers and we did that. You can send us like a new version, no, a new version with AP. She said that she sent a mail and she never got a response. So can I send you with
Send it directly to us.
DTAB?
3D?
Yes, 3D.
Send me
An email, okay. Thanks. So we used to work, but we changed the computer and we that's what happened.
Yeah. Did you try these? No, not yet. You know what these might be called?
This is called pasta frola. This is the another type of
Locale.
No,
I was going to share. I think that's a given. So what's
Para aportar es interesante. Bueno, viste, son muy. A mí lo que pienso un poco que podría tener
and the
y por lo menos la de chico está bastante armonizado con los PCDL. Yo creo que eso es un filón para. No, eso es un que ahí eso no te corre.
so
Creo que pueda sacar.
yeah, I thought that. So in Argentina, that was yeah. That's okay. You're among friends. No, really, because I was just really interested to know.
No,
There's some reason just to know.
está bueno cuando tenés. Y no sé,
Right, so those are really important issues and they tie back to what we're talking about. I think you should. Just in 5 minutes. Yeah, just to say, oh, you're such a it's like if you can listen to her for 8 hours, I can actually she won't take it. Get one, it'll be good. No, that was great.
like really.
Aparte para ver si se
Everybody was talking to me. That's
Eso lo que tenés que hacer es un escrito.
Eran los abastos.
No, because we did. Some people came at 8. One of the late. Yes, at 8. No one arrived here for security and for everything. I did come together.
No tienen los
But then,
no te da.
okay, I would just tell everyone to come.
No, that's
So, I don't know. No, it's yes, I am the recommendation.
No, era porque sabe.
Sí, tiene un nombre. ¿Qué pareció a la manzana o a la pera?
Es como una pera. Una pera con anabólico.
So what do you teach? No, what I teach, they teach.
No,
Okay, yeah, it must be kind of to try
no, because the meat empanadas were not very good today. We all complained that these were not good empanadas. So you can try empanadas.
here in University of Science. I think maybe in plata.
Always some sort of cookie. So they're inside because you're very much.
Yeah, Doug and I shared that. They're very, very good. I was surprised those were totally delicious. I thought it would be sweeter than it's sweet, but it's not as much. Yes, it's very sweet.
With the prawns,
Bread, use the rest.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, that
What we use
my first time I said Mary.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
say
Basically.
So we were
So you're going from one city to another with this course.
Yes,
And you want to cheat.
we are. So we leave actually tomorrow night.
So the
No, that's our last one. So I'm looking forward to it. I've heard good things. Oh yeah. And do you have recommendations for things that we should do?
Pero pasa
I think we have, no, students, no.
if you have a chance, going to Valparaíso, no, but that's far away. Valparaíso is just the ocean, but the same guy. Some houses. Yeah, they are. Neruda. It's in the years back. You can do that in one day. I think so. I think I remember now. It's more than 3 hours. You should check that.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Okay, I think we should. Oh, yeah.
Yo estoy esperanzado a los 8.
Yeah, it's still enough to generally get out there, at least get to know the city.
And you where you stay?
We are. We're in the southern part, but not nearly as far. We're not quite that far. So we're north
So what is it, 3:40? My watch just went crazy.
Yeah. Okay.
You can go by it's a very nice subway.
Transmitter.
But it's
Or this is a way that someone recognize this. Is so easy for me. But
Just, I mean, especially with us not speaking much Spanish, it's so helpful just to be able to put it on a map.
I think
So, best.
look at that are coming for Spain. So you got type and frequency. And you just you're sensitive to where the currents are. The currents are the key. Oh, that's true. Especially for inductive. The other thing is the charges. So for a DC resistance, it's the charges. For these inductive sources, it's currents. Okay, can I have everybody sit down? We shall give this a shot. What's this? Oh, yeah. Let's do it now.
No, not the one.
Actually, before you sit down, can we do a quick photo?
Sure.
That'll give you a bit more exercise too. So we'll just meet, how about right outside? Yeah. Yeah.
La idea puede que se siente.
Bueno.
La zona donde estaba en
Por mañana me digo. Seguro si teníamos que
Number 4. Right there. Just a second. Oh, there we go.
Just give it a moment. I mean, what kind of shoulders?
See.
Okay, what we want to do now is do grounded sources. I got to take you through a few things. Then we were going to put like dipoles in a whole space and look at various kind of targets. This is not only practical, it actually consolidates the other two things that we have. So it's, in a way, it's kind of a review, and in a way, it kind of extends you. It's going to push you a little bit farther than we've done so far.
I'm just gonna get your screen share.
Okay. So what's our motivation? Anything in the sea is well, almost anything in the sea is like some kind of a grounded source, whether it's seafloor EM for de-risking, or whether it's submarine massive sulfides or methane hydrates. All of those things involve that. There's been work on volcanoes. There's a lot of different types of systems that make use of galvanic source tachynomania. So that's what we're going to look at. So what we're going to do now is we're going to combine what we did first thing this morning, which was DC resistivity. Remember that kind of put currents in through there, and then we got these charges up. And then we had inductive sources, which don't really have any charges, but they just have extra currents. And now we're going to put them all together. We're going to have a wire that strings along. So we've got a current A, we're going to go back to B, and then along the wire again. So now we're going to try to find out what happens there. The first thing to establish intuition is the following. I'm going to take an electric dipole. So imagine just a little piece of wire with a little generator on it. I'm going to put it someplace inside the earth. And then I'm going to turn that current off, and then we're going to watch how the currents just disappear. At steady state, they're actually going to look just like a little dipole. So these are current dipole. And the electric and magnetic or electric fields kind of fall off as one over our cube. If I now turn this off, this is what happens. At a very short time after, 10 to the minus 4 milliseconds, the distance is about 4 meters, and here's what my current density looks like. A little bit later, looks like this. Later. If I have a current in the earth and I just let it go, what happens is that it sort of diffuses away. So the amplitude decreases and it just gets broader. So that's a concept I really want you to have in mind. If I've got any little filament of current in the earth and I just let it go, then it just disappears. So what we're seeing here is exactly that. At early times, it looks like this. A little bit later, looks like that. These amplitudes are greatly changed. There's like 3 orders of magnitude different in the yellow here and the yellow here. There's another 2 orders of magnitude there, ordered another. Yeah, so there's like 9 orders of magnitude yellow here and yellow here. So there's, in order to plot them, you need to do that. And then you just see it goes whoosh, just decays away. Important concept. We're going to come back to that. In frequency domain, of course, we expect now the same thing, right? We by this time of the day, you already have time domain, frequency, I don't care, it doesn't matter, right? So we're going to have the same thing, except that the primary is always on, and the data are partitioned into like an in phase and quadruped. And just to emphasize that, if you want to know what the relationship is between a time and a frequency domain experiment, if you took one of them and did its reciprocal, you'd pretty much come up with the other. In the sense of, let's say if I'm doing a time domain experiment at 10 to the minus 4 milliseconds, I take the reciprocal of that, I get a frequency. 1 over time is a frequency. So that would be the same as 10 to the 4th kilohertz in a frequency domain. So here's my diffusion distance, here's my skin depth, and you can see that the currents look sensibly the same. If I go later in time, lower in frequency, so I get. Okay, so this is really important too, right? If I'm trying to think about a frequency domain or a time domain, if you're given a frequency of 10 kilohertz, then 1 over that is a time. Probably the currents in time domain experiment are happening pretty much about the same. So if I put a currents into the Earth, then if early time corresponds to high frequency, late time is low frequency, I got a diffusion distance and a skin depth. That kind of really summarizes things up. Okay, now we're going to look at a grounded source. So I'm going to have a generator hooked up to this current loop, A, and go in to B, and along here. Actually, I could make it into a horseshoe, that's sometimes done, or it could be a straight line. So if we talk about grounded sources on the surface, then again, there's always lots of variables with respect to the geometry, where everything is, which fields, da, da, da. We're going to not explore those. We're just going to use a simple example and kind of highlight the important concepts. So here's where we are. Let's suppose we start off with a grounded system, and I've got a current going along here, underneath the ground, and along there. And at this state, I'm sort of in that steady state sometime before current switch on. Now I'm going to switch that current off. And we've got to figure out what might happen. Okay. So we want to know about currents in the ground. We want to know about fields. We want to actually figure out what's going to happen. So the first thing, let's just break it apart a bit, right? So that we don't get too confused. Let's just think about a wire. Okay? So I got a wire current. And now I'm going to turn that off. So I'm going to switch the generator off. What is going to happen? And then what happens? Okay. Ready?
The primary current will fade, but at the same time there will be some induction from the way. Because we change the current cable.
Good. So there's going to be, I'm changing, well, initially in steady state, there was a magnetic field due to that wire. Now I turn that off, that field no longer exists. So there's a time varying magnetic field onto the Earth. And so there's going to be induction. So it's going to generate some current. What kind of currents am I going to expect in the Earth? Mm-hmm. What are they going to look like? So which way are the currents going? So they go back this way. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so let's think about the response of your. Remember when we were doing the loop? Okay. So there was a time-varying field that came into the loop, and then there was a current that was set up in that loop, okay? And the direction of that current was such that it opposed the change. In other words, the Earth doesn't like change. The Earth wants to stay the same. Okay, so now given that, what would we expect the currents in the Earth to be like? Anybody? Okay, they're going to go back this way.
In the same direction of the original current. The Earth doesn't want to cut off the cable.
That's right. That's right. So if I'm sitting down here, just a little bit below, the magnetic, the Earth is going to respond in a way that, that magnetic field simply doesn't change. And the only way that it can do that is if there is a current that is transferred effectively from the wire to the Earth. There's going to be now an induced current in the Earth. It's going to run on the Earth underneath that cable, and it's going to look just like the current from the cable. And then under that condition, nothing changes, right? So the magnetic field, because you're not going to know whether the magnetic field at you is from the true wire or from a little current that's just epsilon, just fractionally underneath the wire. Everything looks the same. Okay, so immediately, and this is the important thing, immediately after turnoff, the Earth is going to respond so that there's a current at the surface that's going to look just like the wire. So it's called an image current. But importantly, it's running in this direction. You'll be amazed at how many people kind of think it goes the other way. It's common. So now, okay, so now we've got a current in the Earth, okay? Now what happens? It's going to diffuse. So now it's just like that dipole thing, right? So I have a little current filament, and then right? So the same is true with this. Now I got a big long current, but I let it go, and then it goes. It's going to go down, lose amplitude, go upward. So this is what the wire does. It tries to the current in the ground. And that current kind of diffuses downwards. Okay? So that's good. Look at these guys here. So now I take that, and now there's no longer a forcing function. But I do have those currents there. What's going to happen to them? Yeah, so that's, again, each thing, it's like a little current phone. The moment I let it go, it just goes. So these guys are also going to disappear. So those are just, again, going to go downwards, outwards, moves out. So I put it all together, and I'm going to have some of these two things. So inside the Earth, I've got these currents due to induction, and I've got these currents that are just left over from the galvanic system. So we could take a look at that. So here, there's an app for this. You can look to see what happens. Here's a XY plane. Let's just look at a cross section. So this is XZ. So we're going to look right underneath the wire. So the A electrodes here, the B electrodes here. So it's kind of going like this. Homogeneous half space. And then if I let that current off at early times, the amplitude is right here. So here is the image of the current of the wire. A little bit later it goes like this, later like that, and that. So it's basically, in this case, mostly this inductive current that is just diffusing through the earth. Okay? Got it? Ground wire, turn the current off, induces currents in the earth, kind of looks like the wire, and then once that is, every time you get a current, it just kind of diffuses outwards and downwards. Okay, now let's get interesting. So suppose I have a target. Okay, I'm looking for this guy. Right? And now I'm going to, I know if I'm looking for him, I could do a DC resistivity experiment, right? We already did that. And that would, currents that kind of come through here. We get charges built up on this side, charges on this side, and DC resistivity would probably be good. Okay, so that's going to be good coupling for the DC. What about the EM? Well, if you think about the EM that's coming on here, look at the magnetic flux. It's coming right down in here, right? So it's really, really well coupled. The moment I turn this flux off, I'm going to get eddy currents that are going in here, right? So those eddy currents are also going to be important for vortex. And so I can see that that's also going to be really well coupled. So I kind of think that if I'm looking for a conductor and I had a grounded source over top, I might be good both for the galvanic DC resistivity portion as well as the inductor. So let's check that out. Here's what we have. So first of all, here's the A electrode, here's the B. And notice how the currents are going, right? They're getting sucked in here. That means conductor resistance. It's conductor, right? Okay. And this is at steady state. And now I turn it off, and at very early time, here's the currents. So what's going on here? Our diffusion distance is about here, so the information from the wire is cut down. And look where the currents are. They're right at the top. Here's the top of the conductor. And notice, look at the currents. They're circular. These are vortex currents that are going on in here, right? So those are induced. Those currents have nothing to do with galvanic. Those are induced currents. Now, if I look a bit later, you can see that these currents are kind of diffusing into the body. They're circular. Later, they look like that. The amplitudes are continuing to decrease. But now look, those just circular currents that are going on there. But then later, things are different. These currents in here, here's the current lines. They're going like this. So they've changed. They're no longer going in circles like that. The main currents are actually flowing in that direction. So those are like galvanic currents. So that's interesting, isn't it? A system like this, turn it off, and my main response are circular currents. There's a vortex currents in here. but then I still am getting horizontal currents that go through, and these are going to give up, make charges, and these are just going to give magnetic fields. So time arrives at t at steady state. This is what I have. I turn things off, and now I've ignited the body. I've excited the body in an entirely different way. I've got these circular currents, and then at later times, I'm back down to basically just galvanic currents. Oh, okay. So we know the currents. Good. Now you have a limited budget, and you got to go measure something. Okay. So what are our options for measurements, and which measurements should we take? First of all, what's our options for measurements? Pardon? Yeah, we could measure electric or magnetic fields. With electric or magnetic fields, choose which components now do you think are the most. Let's make a direction. Let's say this is the x direction. So this is x, this is y going into the board, going down. Okay? So let's look at the electric field. Ask you, which component of the electric field would you like to measure, and why? Pardon me? Horizontal. They're both horizontal. Well, this direction is x, into board is y. X or y? X. Who would like to measure x? EX. Oh, one. The other three. Who would like to measure anything else? EY? That's not fair. You raise your hand and you look around. What? Pardon me?
I want to measure X.
No, well, I mean, which one is going to be?
One.
Yeah, choose one. Yes. Okay. That's pretty good, right? Because so EX should be good. First of all, that's what you'd measure DC experiment. So here's the charges. So you're going to get a potential difference there. So EX is going to be great for the galvanic part. But what about EX for the inductive part? So here's the electric fields going. So here's the currents, right? So the electric fields are like this, right? So they're in the X direction. So EX is going to be good for both the galvanic portions as well as the inductive portions. Okay, so let's measure EX. So good choice, right? So here's our half space as a function of time, and here's with the conductor. So look at this, at 0.04 milliseconds, we definitely see differences. But by the time you get to 1 millisecond, it's huge. A completely different character. So that's a huge change between a conductor and half space. And similar at 10 milliseconds, this is really a big signature. So X is a good choice. Okay, what about H? Magnetic field. Y direction? Yep, anybody else? General agreement? Okay, Y direction is good, right? If we look back here, the current of the wire is like this. So right over top of the wire, it's completely out of the board. So that's Y. So that's going to be really good from the perspective. And let's check it out. So here's By. Here's the half space, and here's with the conductor. You know, again, 1 millisecond. You've got this huge difference, and 10 milliseconds like that. This is definitely a good quantity to take. The other thing that comes about, if you're going to measure one more component of B, which one might you take? BZ, sure. See, look, because the magnetic field it's horizontal here, but on this side it's down, and on this side it's up. And so if I measured the component of B, here's what we have for the half space, and here's the conductor. So that would be your EX, BY, BZ. Okay, now how about if I make a resistor? That was from a conductor. But what if I make a resistor? What's going to happen? I'm going to show you. So I'm going to make this now a resistor. Okay. So if I look at steady state, here's the currents, and you can tell it's a resistor, right? So it's kind of being excluded, right? It's sort of curving out. So it's a resistor there. Now I'm going to turn that current off. So now what's going to happen? Anybody? Well, what do I expect?
There is no current.
Right. So we've got a resistor. There's still electric field that's generated, but there's no currents. So here's what happens, right? So here's my fields diffusing through distance, and just going like that. So later they still go like that. So there's no vortex currents that are generated here because it's a resistor. Okay? Go through this, like that, like that. So the bottom line here is that if I look at my currents for a resistor, they always it's basically just galvanic currents. So it's just currents that are going. That, which field should I measure? Measure the electric fields. So now I'm expecting there's not going to be much of a magnetic field component. So here's the X. So here's the half space, and here's just the resistor. So you can see it doesn't shine quite as brightly as it does with an induction effect, but it's still there. It's not too bad. And now if I go to the Y, yeah, maybe a little bit, but there's hardly anything there. And BZ, it's pretty hard. So that is now kind of an important takeaway message here. So here I have the half space, here's a resistor, here's a conductor. EX, good signal for a conductor, good signal for a resistor. BY, good for the conductor, yeah. And BZ, again for the conductor, not very much for resistor. Okay, so those are the first order things. I mean, clearly there is some information in here, and it could maybe work with that. But if you're talking the big kid on the block and who's the biggest, which fields to measure, you can see that if you've ever got a resistor that you're looking for, you need to have an electric. So later on, so the next step, So we have to tackle this couplings. Right, so now if I take that plate and I move it around different directions, you can see that there's just kind of general understanding that in certain configurations of the plate might yield good coupling both with DC resistivity and EM. But we've actually worked pretty hard just to do a cube. And at some point, things just get complicated enough that you can't think and sketch your way through things. You just have to appeal to forward simulations. But I think that example that we just showed you with the block, and just thinking your way through that already sets the groundwork. And now you're like, okay, I understand there's going to be coupling issues and things like that. But you just have to appeal to numerical modeling. And here's where, when you do the numerical modeling, and then you can actually compute the charges on the outside, and you can compute the currents inside and outside, you really start to get some insight as to how well you're doing and how good your experiment is. Okay, well, let's do history. How many people have heard of the Deccan traps? Oh, it's either really late in the afternoon. Any coffee guy coming around? Okay. Okay, Deccan traps. Anybody heard of it? No? Oh, okay. Well, India, about 65 million years ago, there was an immense eruption of flood results. I mean, millions of cubic kilometers of stuff coming up over a million years, I think. And that really covered large parts of India in basalt, thickness that could be anywhere from a half a kilometer to a couple of kilometers deep. So you can imagine this region, okay, that about a kilometer of basalt on that, and how much eruptive gases that would have come out of that. For many years, it was felt that this was the cause of extinction of the dinosaurs. Just because you have immense climate change, and that could really disrupt vegetation and everything else. What's the best guess for why dinosaurs went out? A meteor, where? Pardon me? Yeah, Chicxulub, or Yucatan Basin, yeah. So, about 65 million years ago, it was now thought that there was a big meteor came in right in the Yucatan Peninsula area. So it's called Chicxulub crater, and that gave people now think that was the real cause for the extinction of the dinosaurs. But this eruption of the salts may have also contributed to that demise. The reason that this was of interest here, the petroleum companies were interested in the sedimentary, the sediments underneath the basalt. So that often happens, right? So you've got lots of basalt, trying to get through that, see the sediments. So the area of interest is this area here. And there was a number of thoughts about what was going on. The best estimates was that there was salts, there were sediments, thought there were sediments underneath. They thought that the sedimentary thickness should increase from the north to the south. So they did a DC resistivity survey, this long line of data that went over top, and basically they found, well, a thickness of basalt at the top, and this was sediments here, and then basement underneath. But it was unclear from that just, how good a model that was, and again, how things progressed as you went from north to south. As I said, they thought the sedimentary thickness was going to increase. So then they decided to do one of these grounded source surveys. So here's how it worked. You set up a grounded source that's a couple of kilometers long, and then you go, a couple to 15 kilometers away. Each place you set up a receiver. Consists of the electric fields and magnetic fields, and you're going to measure those as for a time-domain experiment at a number of places here, and try to see what the thickness is that it takes. So there's a number of lines of data of which this was carried out. Before you do anything in the field, you should do a survey design. This is pretty crude. This is a long time ago, but it's okay. So here's the hypothesized geologic structure. There's basalt up at the surface. It could be anywhere from, say, 1.5 to 3 kilometers thick. There's sediments, 20 ohm meters, kilometer or 2, and then there's. So what they did here is to look to see if the sediment, if the basalts were 1.5 kilometers thick, or 2 or 3, I see any difference. Do the modeling, and you get these. Of course, here the parent resistivity as a function of time. You can see that they're different. So you've got some sensitivity. The other question of sensitivity is to what the signal, how the signal changes with respect to the resistivity of the sediment. So 20, 50, 100 ohm meters gives rise to these different curves. So it's kind of a sensitivity study, kind of with respect to changes in wall parameter. And yeah, you're definitely seeing something. So now they go out and do this, and we look at 3 lines. So here's this line L along here. What we're seeing is the inverted result, parametric inversion, with a few layers. The top one being resistive, so that's your basalt. Then you've got sediment thickness underneath, and then you've got basement. Scale on here, that's a kilometer. This is about a kilometer, a little bit more of basalt, and a little bit more than a kilometer of sediments, and then you get basement. So that's what's happening along this line here. If you go to line R, here, or maybe even let's go down to line G down here, so it's L and G. So it's the same kind of sequence, except that the salt is thickening and the sedimentary layer is getting thinner. And by the time you get down to K, there'll be nothing but the salt over basement. So entirely the opposite of what the geologists and others had thought. So the sedimentary thickness is actually decreasing as you go this way. In electromagnetic interpretation, it's not just the the conductivity of something that's important, but it's actually the conductivity thickness product. That's called the conductance. So the conductance, conductivity thickness product from those different inversions plotted on this map. And you can see that the largest conductance is up in here, and the smallest is here. Outcomes wanted to see what there was in the sediments, so then they chose to drill up here. And this is kind of the synthesis. So prior to doing the drilling, they had done interpretation, and this is what they felt was the thickness of the salt, just about 1.5 kilometers. And there was sedimentary thicknesses and basalts. So that was from drilling. This is what they found. The sort of these units up here down to about 1.5 kilometers is basically decontract basalt. All of these units in here are sediments, and then this is basement basalt. So actually, simple model, but it kind of captured the big scale structure. So that was that was kind of nice. It provided a example of the use of time of the EM. It was done a while ago. Today, you probably do things with higher fidelity, but it's not possible without the. You just couldn't get that for the size. I wonder if oh, maybe this is okay. We have got some tutorial information that might set the scene, but maybe I can just do it by hand. So if you think about the seafloor EM experiment, this is an example of what we might have. So this is an area in the Barents Sea off of Norway. So it's a known hydrocarbon complex. It's there, and the thing with seismic is that it can recognize oil and gas reservoirs. It has a very difficult time determining the quality of the hydrocarbons. So you really want to know the hydrocarbon saturation, and particularly whether it's just gas phase, just some high quality. And so the overall idea was to, okay, let's use the seismic, do a borehole, let's use the SEM, and try to characterize this reservoir as far as fluids and porosity and hydrocarbon saturation. So here's a cross section. All of this complex faulting that's in here, and there's a region in here that there's potentially hydrocarbons in this green unit. And the question is, how could you go about and find those? From the work that we've done already, the first thing that you would ask is, okay, what's the electrical conductivity of this region here if it's got hydrocarbons versus the outside? And the answer to the question is that hydrocarbons are resistant. And the moment that somebody tells you that something is resistive, the very first thing that you think about is DC resistivity type of problems. We've already seen that inductive source things are not very good at getting, at getting resistors. So what happens is that logically, you think, okay, if I've got anything that's resistive down here, I put out a current dipole. Suppose I do an electrical source here with two ends. So it's like a DC resistivity experiment, but done in the water. So I do that. So currents are going to flow around. Some of them are going to get down in here. And then whenever there's a change in the resistivity, I'm going to build up charges, and then I can measure the electric fields. Okay, so that is after you finish this course, if somebody had asked you, okay, what should I do to find a hydrocarbon layer? You said, okay, well, our first accuracy is to tow some kind of controlled electric source, okay, and we're going to measure the electric fields. And measuring the inline electric fields is good. So I could think of towing a strip cable, have a transmitter, and then tow a streamer cable of receivers that go out like this. And then how long should those receivers be? How long does that cable have to be? Yeah, right. So we kind of said, we should be 3 times the depth. So if this is E, that means our cable has to be 6 kilometers. So that's my basic experiment. If I'm going to have any chance of seeing that, my biggest bang for my buck be measuring electric fields for an electric source, and I've got to have receivers that extend, at least 3 times the depth. So it's like 6, 7
About the power.
the power.
Yeah,
Yes.
power that you have to use because then you get some more than short circuit your cuts.
Yeah, so you're going to get quite a bit of current that's flowing in here, but actually the sediments are, they're more conductive than, or less conductive than it, but not so much. So this is maybe 3 siems per meter, and upper sediments are saturated with salt water. So the sediments are often close to 2 per meter. But you're going to get currents that are flowing through there, unquestionably. So you need to have a good transmitter, and but that's it. More power to the transmitter, and better quality signal on your receivers. Do the best you can, and they seem to do actually pretty well. So why does it seem like a really reasonable thing to do? And that's in this diagram here. So looking at here is the acoustic impedance, and here's the resistivity. So we're looking at kind of a cross plot between impedance, seismic impedance, and resistivity. If I look at these different things, are like the blue is wet, red is 80% gas, yellow is 20% gas, and black is just that. If I just looked at the acoustic beats, let's suppose I took acoustic beats, let's suppose I had this number here, whatever it is. Okay, what units would this be? Well, it could be blue, yellow, green, red, black. The acoustic beats is completely agnostic as to which of those it is. So it doesn't do any good. I can't distinguish between wet, 20% or 80% based upon acoustics. However, if I look at electrical resistivity, it's a whole different story. Because if I look at this resistivity here, I get mostly blue, yellow, and blue. Here I just get background. But if I get resistivities up to 30 or 40 ohm meters, well, I get red and green. So red and green, red's 80% gas, green is 80% oil. So here's my oil, here's my hydrocarbons out here, and here's all the other stuff that I don't care about. In other words, resistivity is the indicator of the quality of the hydrocarbons. So that's good. And that actually happened at a couple of fields. And if you looked at resistivity versus hydrocarbon saturation, you find that the critical point, by the time you get to 0.7 saturation, then the resistivity exceeds about 20 ohm meters. And in this region in here, a high quality hydrocarbon. Okay, so let's do it. So they're going to do CSEM and seismic simultaneously. So one boat towing 2 sets of cables. And there's 6 lines of seismic and also CSEM. Now, at each CSEM, there's going to be 72 receivers. So that means here's our receiver cable. There's 72 of these guys. They're just measuring the electric field, just like DC resistors. Measuring the electric field along here. And the offsets are going to be from like 31 meters to just about 8 kilometers. So that's a big, that's when you think about it, that's a real mother cable, right? It's just like extending, just rolling out 8 kilometers cable. Okay. And we're going to use frequencies 0.2 to 3 hertz. So there is going to be an inductive effect. It's going to help a lot in trying to determine the the depth of things. So there is some induction, and we use that. So what do we already know? Well, there was two wells. One is alternative, and the other is central. Alternative was a well that had been drilled, and it was dry. Central was a well that was drilled, and it was productive. So what they wanted to do was to use this CSEM technique to decide, okay, can I rank two other targets that they've had? One was Hansen and one was Valid. So these are going to be kind of the validation wells. The CSEM survey looks like this. So there are all these blue lines going here. But they also did one cross line. I want to look in particular at this cross line and see what the data were and what the results. So we're in frequency domain here. And when we had talked this morning about frequency, we had, okay, there's an in phase and a quadrature phase, right? But I could equally have well said, oh, well, there's an amplitude and a phase. Remember that psi? So that's a phase shift. And then there's an amplitude. So real and metric or amplitude and phase, either work. What I'm looking at here is the amplitude. This top line has to do with the receiver that's closest to the transmitter. Maybe that was 31 meters. And now I'm just toying them off. And I'm looking at the amplitude. Okay? And that's what I see. And then I go to the next offset. I mean, the last offset looks like this. So if I look at the amplitude, you know, there's really not very much happening as I'm going along here. I don't really see anything. But if I look at the phase, look at that phase shift. Look at this. I mean, these are 80-degree phases over here versus 20. I mean, there's a large phase difference. So there's something happening here. I can see that in the data. Seismic data. This is seismic data. It's color code for amplitude. And here's a couple of horizons that have been picked. You can see the faults that are coming in here. And yeah, so that was that section along that same line. So from the seismic and the well logs, this is what they had been interpreted. So these are the sort of fluid facies that have been determined. Here's clay content. Here's the total porosity. What's of interest here is the two control wells. There's alternative, which is here. That was the one that was dry. And there was central, which was productive. So if we look at this top region in here, where we've got green, for instance, you can see that there's lots of green here, and that's the producer. There's green here. That one's dry. Okay, so now you look at these two wells here. There's Hansen and there's Valid. Some green in there. And now the question is, okay, let's prioritize these guys. Which should we drill, and what's the carbon content? So then they do the CSEM, again for the following reasons. This is what we saw earlier with hydrocarbon saturation. Here's resistivity. It's very sensitive, especially once you get over about 0.6 or 0.7 hydrocarbon saturation. The resistivity goes way up. D-wave velocity, you can see here, it just simply is totally independent of what the hydrocarbon saturation is. This is again what I said earlier. If I do the CSEM processing, okay, then I end up with this image here. So central is the really more resistant. So the red is resistivity. So red is high resistivity, blue is low. So this is really quite resistive in here, and this is very low resistivity in here. So that was the control that's productive. That was the control that's dry. Now if we look here at these two wells, Hansen versus Bolland, you can see that this is more resistive than that. So it's a little bit subtle on this image, but this is definitely more resistive. So now the goal is to into this and to integrate it with their rock model imaging, find these two quantities and end up with this as hydrocarbon saturation. So Central was the biggest hydrocarbon saturation. This one was dry, they knew that before. And now of these two guys, the Bolland seems to have less hydrocarbon saturation than Hansen. Hansen definitely wins on that. And in fact, that was a pretty good well, and this one was dry. So it's a bit counter to what these, this top map would have been, with a lot more green here than over there. So in that sense, the CSEM was actually really helpful in helping kind of de-risk that, to say, okay, my priorities is to drill here as opposed to here. Good. I think we have a lot of tutorial material on CSEM, but I think we'll kind of omit that, except I'm going to show you one movie. I'm going to give you, after having talked about the CSEM problem, there's one thing that came up very early in the application of this, and that was that when you went to really far offsets, you had what was called an airway. Okay? And people discussed this, and people bantered it around and tried to figure out, okay, what is this airway? Does it really exist? How can I get rid of it? Just, it caused a huge amount of consternation. What I'm going to show now is a movie. It's about 20 seconds long. And at the end of that movie, you're going to wonder, like, why are you guys fussing and fussing about? Because it's completely obvious. And here's the power of images and the power of dynamic images to really understand the physics of, I think, without going into a lot of details about this, just to kind of show you what's happening is really good. So I'm going to flip through these, but I'm going to stop at occasional slides here that are. So when you talk about the general CSEM problem, then you do have this transmitters. That's basically what you have. You also have natural source. So you can put receivers on the bottom. That. And yeah, here's a canonical problem. So we've got the ocean, we've got the sediments, and then maybe you've got a reservoir, and this might be, a couple of kilometers thick. So you want to find that. And yeah, transmitters can be like that, or they could also be like that. We could have inductive transmitters in CSEM too. But that's actually becoming more common now as people are looking for submarine massive solids. And then measuring electric and magnetic fields, you can put instruments on the bottom that just measure EX, EY, and 3 components of the magnetic field. Here's a plot that I want to show. So this is kind of a canonical plot of the resistivity without hydrocarbon layer. And it's interesting that the electric fields that you get here behave like this. And then there's this kind of strange thing that just sort of flattens out. So even you just look at that guy and you're like, okay, what's going on? What's going on there? If you put the hydrocarbon layer in, then actually the signal is like that. So from the difference between, without the hydrocarbon layer and with the hydrocarbon layer, you see that there's between these, and this is why the oil companies got really excited about this, because there's a real difference here between two. Even when you go out far, in this particular case, the fact that you've got this hydrocarbon layer in there still wins. That becomes the common signal. However, there still is something funny happening in here, and in different circumstances, this stuff can actually come in at a higher amplitude. What I want to do is to talk a little bit about how energy propagates. So we have this system in here. So here's your transmitter, and we're going to be measuring fields at places along here. And the question, how does the energy get there? Well, it's got a couple of paths. Some of the energy could just go through the ocean, like that. It could go through the sediments, like that, so we're trying to be here. Some of the energy could go through the hydrocarbon layer, and then come up. But some of it could also come up through here, and then back down. There are kind of four general paths, and anybody who's associated with seismology would be really comfortable in drawing these arrows, right? Because, okay, I can see that's ray paths. What I want to show you is now a movie. And this was generated, first of all, Dieter Werthmüller generate a program. It's open source, which is great, and that was used by the other co-presenter for the disc, Saudi Kang, to develop this movie. And what this movie is going to show is how the energy is propagating, and in particular, we're just going to be looking at the electric fields as a function of time. So the situation is going to be a time domain system. And I'm going to turn that current off, and then I'm going to watch how the waves propagate, and I'll be able to see. And what I want you to look for, okay? So this is ocean, and this is sediments. So this is more conductive than this. So remember the diffusion distance. If it's more conductive, does it diffuse faster or slower? I can't hear anybody. Shout it. Pardon me? Okay, if the waves are going to travel out in here, are they going to travel out faster this way or this way? Travel faster this way? Yeah. Okay, this is more conductive. So that means the diffusion distance is less for any particular time, which means it goes less, which effectively means it's traveling more slowly. Okay, so it's the other way around. We should expect it's going to travel more slowly here than here. So it's going to travel faster down here. Now, here's a hydrocarbon layer. That's 100 ohm meters compared to 1. So how's the energy going to propagate in here? Fast or slow? Fast, yeah. So we could expect it to propagate fast here. Moreover, energy, once it hits up here at the Earth-air interface, so the resistivity here is really big. So now it's going to go really fast, right? That's what we would expect, just from understanding, okay, a time domain experiment, diffusion distance, how it relates to conductivity. That's what we should see. Now watch this. Because in 20 seconds, you're going to understand what people thought about for about 2 years. Okay, so watch this. So we're letting this go off. And see the electric fields? They advanced in here. So at this particular time, they're all the way out here versus the small out there. And now also, notice this guy is just, the energy is just starting to diffuse down into this layer. And remember, once it gets to this layer, it should be able to propagate more quickly, right? Look at that. So the energy here is propagating out here, but some of it got in here, and now it's propagating along here. Okay. So you can see how it lasted for. And then as it propagates on here, there's going to be energy that propagates up. So you can see where it is now. So this guy is all the way along here. And up here, he's just starting to hit that interface. So we're finally getting energy up through the ocean to the air. Did you see that?
Yeah.
It just hit there and went blasting along through. This guy's still moving along here. I'm sitting in here someplace, okay, my receivers. I'm continually getting energy that's coming up here, but now I'm also going to be getting energy that comes down here. And if I'm far enough away, this energy here, the air wave, is actually going to be the first person to arrive. Yep. Okay. Suddenly you're like, okay, sure, of course. Listen to it. That movie was generated based upon some actually fundamental work that a very, very good electromagnetic scientist, Peter Weigelt, that name, he wrote just a stellar paper in the early 2007, that just laid out the mathematics, showed asymptotically which waves should arrive first, and talked about guided waves here and guided waves up there. And this movie shows that in space. Okay. Let's see here. Peter Weigelt.
How do you spell Weigelt?
W-E-I-D-E-L-T.
Thanks.
Just a minute about this. I just want to mention this. We're not going to go through this.
You slide.
I did.
Try it.
Oh, I'm doing it.
Correct.
Took a while. I'm just going to mention it because this is something that you're going to see in the next few years, and that is methane hydrates. That is kind of worldwide, and they're a large source of hydrocarbons. traditionally, what's happened is that you get hydrocarbons in kind of a methane hydrate, sort of ice, in which the methane molecules are housed. And those become, if you could mine those, if you could extract that, bring them up to the surface, they could actually be a valuable source of hydrocarbons. Now, just from talking to a couple of people here, I understand that it's probably not a particularly hot item for Argentina, but I think it's the next slide. Oh, this kind of shows you some examples of how the hydrates look like, from disseminated to layers, and they're very resistive. They could be up to 20,000 millimeters, so it's really quite resistive. And there was a map.
It was earlier.
Oh, was it earlier? Because that was really good. Ah, here we go. That was actually the thing I was going to look at. So, kilograms per square meter. So if you want to look at the purples, so there's actually not very much in South America, but there's there might be something that's of interest offshore here that could be mineable. If you notice Japan, so if you look up here, you can see that there's really large resources. The Japanese will probably be mining this stuff very, very shortly. Within the next year, I think they're planning to have actual mines of methane hydrates. And the reason where CSEM comes into play is the fact that these are resistors. So you do the same type of experiment. You can also just simply put down sensors on the ocean floor, measuring electric and magnetic fields, and you could tow a transmitter around, and then you could use that as a signal to eventually invert to get a three-dimensional structure of the resistivity, and it's the high resistivity regions that are used. Case history is with you if you want to take a look at it, or if you want to answer. Let's see. In between. We were going to go to 6, and at one point I said we could do 5. How are you feeling? We have an option here. I can either do natural sources right now and talk about maybe calorics, or we can basically say, okay, that was a lot of stuff today, give me I'm happy either way. People are looking a bit tired. It's a lot to digest. Okay, because we did DC resistivity. So for people who haven't, like for this has not been a background, there's a lot of new stuff to take into account. So maybe what I'll do is find a slide. Okay, so let me just make some summary comments, and then we'll talk about tomorrow. Maybe that'll be enough. Let's just refocus where we were. Okay, so today we started off with DC resistivity, and we saw that the fundamental DC resistivity experiment is tunneling current through the ground. When that current flows through a region that has different conductivities, then there's a charge that's built up, so that the electric field is discontinuous. That charge then gives rise to the electric potentials that you measure at the surface. That's the basis of the DC resistivity experiment. Okay. Then we did the fundamentals of EM. There are two important laws that happen. The first is Faraday's law that says I have a time-varying magnetic field that gives rise to an electric field. Okay. So now I got an electric field everywhere. Electric fields everywhere. But it's only in those places where there's a conductivity that it really matters, because J, the current density, is the product of sigma times E. So we could have an electric field everywhere, but it's only if there's an electrical conductivity that we actually get a current. So time-varying magnetic fields generate currents in conductors. Okay, that's Faraday's law. And then Ampere's law says, oh, I have a current that gives me a magnetic field. So that is the fundamental aspect of inductive sources. So we can fly around, or we put a roof on the surface of the Earth, anything like that, and that would constitute an inductive source. Okay, and then we did grounded sources, which make use of both of those. So we looked at kind of, there's always a DC part that's going through, and then there's an inductive part. And the interplay between those two things changes a lot with respect to geometries, conductivities, and stuff like that. But in the end, if you're trying to figure out if you're exciting things, then you do two things. You look at the charges and you look at the currents. And between those two things, you can decide whether you're exciting the object and also which fields you should measure. Because if you just have charges, then you might as well just be measuring electric fields. If you've got currents, then you can measure both the electric and magnetic. Okay, so that's kind of where we are. What we're going to do then tomorrow morning, we're going to start with natural sources. And the reason for doing that is that sometimes we're looking for really big scale structures. And we simply can't make our transmitters large enough, strong enough to see down to the depths that we want. So we need to rely on something on GPR just to show you what happens with Maxwell's equations. The frequency goes higher. And then, because initially, for what we've been doing is quasi-static, so the energy is diffusing through, that's attenuating. But at some point, frequencies, that other term kicks in, and actually then the information starts to propagate as a. And then the GPR sections for the seismologists here, you'll love it because it looks exactly the same as what you're used to. And the interpretation is also the, oh, I see something. Here's a nice hyperbola. Okay, so something is happening here. I got scattered here, or I got a reflection there. And so seismologists love GPR because there's so many things that are shown. So we'll do that. And then we'll talk about induced polarization. That has, I think this is one of the fields that is progressively going to see more and more emphasis as time goes on. It's heavily used in mineral exploration, but it has a lot of applications in groundwater and especially in waste dumps. I don't know what Buenos Aires, what does Buenos Aires have? We have a lot of waste stops that have been. In a lot of places, we're just in Mexico City, right? And there, in Mexico City, it's blossoms like 22 or 24 million people, right? So they used to have areas that there was no population, so that's where they dump the garbage. But then now those have been populated out, so now you're living on top of a garbage dump, and they're toxic, right? In places in the United States, I've got an example from Tucson, Arizona, where the same thing happened. The city limits at one time are small, so you dump your garbage out a couple of kilometers. After a while, those couple of kilometers are built on, and could cause a problem. Then we'll talk about the future. So we'll do that early in the morning, and that might take a good 2 hours, I guess, to do that. And then what I'd like to do is to switch over and have you talk about problems that are associated with things that are happening in Argentina. So we've already seen that there's freshwater, saltwater interfaces, there's geothermal energy, there's GPR for archaeology. What else do we have? Oh, aquifer pollution. And I'm not sure what else do you have. I wouldn't mind taking a poll, but what we're looking for, and please do not be shy in presenting. There's a lot of people like, oh gosh, I can't express myself very well, English is not good, or it's not technical enough. We don't need that. We just want you to stand up and tell us, okay, what problem are you working on? Connections or questions with respect to electromagnetic? And if you can do that, and you can capture that, you'll actually have something really tangible to leave Buenos Aires with, and people will be able to look and say, oh yeah, you're looking at not only a geothermal problem, but here's the kind of structure for the geothermal problem, which is different than just ISO. Or what kind of aquifer pollution, or where is that saltwater interface? I mean, just anything that has to do with. So this way, who would be willing to talk? Get a show of hands. Come on. 3, 4. Which might be part of the morning and early part of the afternoon. And then we'll switch it over to talk about our open source resources and SimPay modeling and inversion, and just try to get a bit more information on how to get connected and how to really raise the level of scientific computation that is being done here and inversion. So we can give you a slight tutorial about inverse theory and how it applies even to a simple 1D MT problem. Just open up. So that's the plan. So what we'll do is we will start at 9 o'clock sharp. So sorry if there was any confusion about an 8 o'clock. Anyway, tomorrow start at 9, and then we'll be finished by 5. Good. Thank you.